Chapter 1. Gigi. Would you excuse me? Oh, of course. Captain Kenneth Slegg yawned 3 times before standing and addressing the early 20-something-year-old young man opposite the open seat between them. The young man, who had been reading on his laptop, gave Kenneth a carefree smile and stood the laptop on his lap to let him pass. Although it was zero gravity, merely floating over to your seat would earn you the ire from other passengers. Half of the passengers on today's shuttle flight aboard the HATHAWAY'S were a bunch of the privileged class. If he performed a spacewalk in front of them, they could very easily put a stop to any promotion chances, or much worse. He was grateful, though, that there weren't any government officials with military affiliations, but the result would be all the same. Out of the corner of his eye, Kenneth caught one of the Earth Federation cabinet ministers engaging in the usual flattery towards a young girl that everyone had been talking about as he moved to the restroom at the rear of the cabin. The flight manifest of Flight 356 was about 40 passengers with a crew of 5. It was an exclusive flight. You either have to pay a hefty fee or have a slew of connections for the privilege of boarding. So, as long as you're on this ship, whether it be to Earth or a space colony somewhere, you were exempt from the arrival and departure checks. The very fact of being aboard the ship guaranteed one's credentials. Furthermore, aside from military aircraft, this flight is the only one capable of landing directly on Earth. The youth next to Kenneth gave an unabashed impression of coming from a family whose social standing must have connections, which was in keeping with the HATHAWAY'S. With a frivolous sense, he questioned the young girl in her late teens who was being flattered by one of the cabinet ministers. There was something vulgar about her, something which made it impossible to categorize her as a passenger of class. Gigi Andalusia, was it? Having finished his business, he stood in front of the mirror thinking back to the name of the girl who was whispered amongst the gentlemen passengers. As he was readjusting the front of his suit, he thought there was a sort of coolness to the style of clothing, though he didn't care much for the look. As for his own good looks, however, he didn't mind at all. Had the Kimberly task force have handled things properly, I wouldn't have had to come here in such a hurry. Those were his thoughts on the matter, at least. Following Char's rebellion, the Earth Federation Space Forces had not been involved in any real combat and were even bereft of potential enemies. Yet in spite of that, Kenneth had been meaninglessly engaged in the ongoing development of new model mobile suits. Although his fighting spirit surged at the thought of the possibility of real combat again, his assignment on Earth was not something that appealed to him. That said, he was still a young man. With the activities of an anti-Federation government organization calling themselves Mufti Aaron intensifying on Earth, the Kimberly Task Force was charged with moping them up. 10 days ago, the new model mobile suit Penelope, along with its test pilot, who happened to be Kenneth's subordinate, Ryan Eim, were dispatched. Immediately following that, however, Kenneth himself had received orders to assume command of that task force as a successor. That was the day before yesterday, which was why Kenneth, having made use of military privileges, was able to board the HATHAWAY'S, the quickest flight to Earth. Being on the flight in the company of the cabinet members, however, merely served to confirm what a bunch of utter lowlives they really were. Even if I'm killed by Mufti Aaron, I'm not in any position to complain, is what he had come to think. As he adjusted his tie, he wondered why it was that Julie felt she needed to part ways with such a dashing man. It hadn't quite been 2 years since their divorce. Leaving the bathroom, he peeked into the lounge. 3 couples, the cabinet ministers with their spouses, sat around chit-chatting with drinks in hand. Apart from them, another 3 high-level officials formed a lonely tableau as they played video games. With that, he returned to the cabin. The cabinet minister who was chatting with Gigi Andalusia was nowhere to be seen. Kenneth floated up to the side of the seat belonging to the infamous young woman seated in the row before his. He glanced down at her knees. On the laptop's display appeared to be moving pictures. The young woman's long, transparent blonde hair covered her shoulders. Her eyelashes glinted with the same transparent radiance. As a Caucasian, her face may not have elicited much fanfare, but her skin, on the other hand, with its oriental smoothness and Latino coloring, only served to reinforce the transparency of her blonde hair. Despite being a typical soldier, Kenneth was not as rigid and austere as his appearance would suggest. Nonetheless, The ease that he found in talking with the young woman was in part due to the air of enjoying the company of men she imparted. This also accounted for why men aboard the flight, despite the disapproving looks from their spouses, were able to come over and speak to her one after the other. "Do you mind?" "No, not at all." Although she didn't give off a feeling of being surprised, her look said otherwise as she was addressed by an unexpected male voice. It all seemed rather elegant. The rate at which she raised her face won him over, almost catching him by surprise. "I appreciate it. I can't seem to find anyone to talk with." As soon as he uttered the words, he spared himself a wry smile. "She is just a kid after all, isn't she?" he thought to himself. His embarrassment must have been evident on his face. The girl appeared to have laughed, but in the blink of an eye her face resumed its normal repose as she looked him in the eye. To Kenneth, it felt as though this was the first time he'd ever been stared directly in the eyes by a woman when they met for the first time. To top it all off, the ever-changing, flickering range of expressions on the girl's face struck him. "Would you mind if I sat here?" All the passengers in the cabin were aware that the girl was the only one sitting in the row of 3 seats. "If it's going to be long, I'd rather not," she said bluntly. "So it's all right if I make it short?" "Well, let's say maybe, shall we?" He found nothing remotely unpleasant about being told so in that manner. "As you wish, I'll keep this short. My name is Kenneth Slegg. I'm with the Federation Forces." He introduced himself as he floated over and into the seat. "My guess would be that you're a captain, yes?" Without any inclination of closing the laptop, she followed his movement with her translucent blue gaze. "What are you reading?" "A picture book. Here, have a look." She turned the laptop towards him. Sleek movement of beautiful computer graphics filled the screen. 2 rabbits chased a butterfly in an animated fairy tale. Several lines of text were displayed beneath the images. "That story is quite popular, isn't it?" "It's a classic. I can't say if it's very popular, but if I like something, I'll watch it no matter what." "Humph." Before Kenneth could express his admiration, she switched to the next screen. "Look, it's cute, isn't it?" The screen was alive with animation. A rabbit and fox bounced their way around and around the border, while in the center, a rabbit caught in a cage of petals was crying a fountain of tears. There's quite a bit going on, that's for sure. As Kenneth was staring at the screen, the young woman shifted to a completely different subject. "Seeing that you're a soldier, there's something I'd like to ask you. What do you think of Mufti Navu Aaron?" Well... Taken completely off guard, Kenneth briefly glanced into the young woman's eyes. The way she had shifted gears in mid-sentence and spoke what was on her mind revealed an inner strength to her that was completely at odds with her outward appearance. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, flustered. Though he had every intention of asking in a calm and composed manner, that name and its connection to his current reasons for heading Earthside only served to expose his agitation. "No reason in particular, I was just wondering. I mean, here we are conversing with one another much like passing strangers do." She laughed after using such an awkward analogy. As far as her bluntness was concerned, nothing changed. He found her lack of equivocating refreshing. "What's so funny?" "Well, I mean, you are heading to Earth to wipe out Mufti, aren't you? My name is Gigi Andalusia. I'd prefer it if you addressed me properly." "Ah, my apologies. It's not my intention to question your suppositions regarding me." In the face of his apparent discomfort, Gigi maintained her faint smile. She did have a small measure of sympathy for his apparent bewilderment. "Don't laugh at me. I accept that I am an individual who can be overly emotional, but to have my shortcomings so easily pointed out by someone as young as you is, well, a considerable shock to me." During his lengthy explanation, the girl seemed to have forgotten all about him, going back to staring at the pictures dancing across her laptop screen. Yet the moment he finished, she glanced back up at him. "So what about the answer to my question?" she pressed. Sensing the meaning in the glint of her eye, he blurted out a reply unbecoming of a man his age. "Mufti, he's, well, a dangerous individual. He's someone who presents a threat to the order of the Earth Federation government." Such a formal answer. The world seems to be quite fond of Mufti. There's a plethora of special programs on TV with people wondering, is Mufti Amuro Ray, or is he Char Aznable come back to life? or whether he'll do everything that people wish for. Forgetting the computer, Gigi stretched her upper body, letting the unit float away. Kenneth reached out a hand and stopped the free-floating device and pushed it back towards her. "Oh, thank you." Pulling the laptop back onto her knees, she appeared to forget all about her question and started staring back at the pictures on the screen again. "That's overkill, don't you think? After assassinating all the important figures in the Federation government, a policy should be enacted to cleanse the Earth by making everyone leave it. That's Mufti's declaration. Don't you think it's rather childish?" Kenneth spoke with a newfound confidence, one he thought sufficient to stand up to the young girl's words. However, her response was simple. Sometimes a child's logic is the correct one. "You haven't given this enough thought. The world simply doesn't work as easily as that." "Right. I understand adult logic, but take high society, for example. Are they really so high and mighty?" As if to bring an end to their discussion, Gigi leaned in close to him, her voice almost in a whisper. "I see your point. There's corruption, favoritism as well, but one can't really maintain a spotless integrity now, can they? What are your thoughts on that?" He could see the shine in her eyes, yet, almost as a reflex, he let the words slip out. "Grease the wheels of society, perhaps?" "Nothing but riddles from you, as usual." Kenneth had no reply to the young girl and her sudden about-face of anger. He was keenly aware that he had offered nothing but trite arguments for their little exchange. "However, there is something I'd like to correct you on. Although you say they've appeared to assassinate key government officials, would using mobile suits be considered assassination?" "Not at all. It's an indiscriminate attack." "I beg to differ. It's not indiscriminate if they're targeting only Earth Federation cabinet members and those who are in important positions. Mufti has clearly identified their targets, haven't they?" Kenneth had nothing, not even a whimper. Again, Gigi placed the laptop on her lap with both hands and changed the display. Kenneth took this to mean Gigi's few minutes were over. "Sorry, but although my time seems to be up, I wanted to ask you of your opinion on them." "I think it's cute," she said, tilting her face sidewise before immediately looking back at the screen. "You're saying that the organization calling itself Mufti Navue Aaron is cute?" "Yes, it's a blend of Sudanese, Arabic, and Old Irish. It's not a name at all, it's an awful hodgepodge," she said as if reciting it, her eyes never leaving the display. "Ha ha ha, I suppose so." Although he felt like asking her a little more about what she thought, he sensed her aversion and floated away from the seat. He floated past the young man with a studious look to him, and as he slid back into his own seat, he glanced over at him. "What's with this guy?" he thought. "Is he a hunchback or something?